Hey there, I hope you're having a wonderful day because it is time for another board game review. In this video, we're going to be looking at It's a Wonderful Kingdom. This is a spin-off of It's a Wonderful World with a more medieval theme and designed strictly with a two-player and solo experience. In this game, you'll be playing as rival duchies, trying to draft cards, outmaneuver your opponents to get the cards you desire, to get more resources, and hopefully have the most victory points by the end of one of 3 different modules. Here you can see we have the game set up with the central board holding all the resources, your player over there, as well as some starting cards you'll begin with. Now, this game is played over 4 rounds, and I want to point this out because in a rare moment in Roll for Crit history, I have lost a piece, and I'm now using this little jester meeple as the round tracker. But there is something that fits more appropriately to that shape used to go over 4 rounds. Now you'll start each round with 8 cards in hand. These cards will mostly look like this, where there is a cost to play them, a recycle bonus, a playing bonus, as well as what they do once constructed. We'll go more into that when we hit those phases. You will also always have one calamity card. These are worth negative points at the end of the game, so you do not want to draft these. Game will start off with some cards like this, and on your turn, you're going to choose 2 cards and either put them on the left or right, and you can either put them together or split them up like so. Then your opponent is going to look at those and decide which side they want. So let's say that they're feeling like they want these cards, so they will take them and put them aside for now. Then it's your opponent's turn to add cards where they can either try to keep things equal or maybe even split them up because they really want this card and try to make this pile more appealing to you. Once you choose one, so let's say we take these, you're going to put them over here in your selection area for now, and until you finish drafting when everyone loses all the cards in hands, then you'll actually interact with these cards. One final thing before we enter the next phase, you also have these trap tokens. At any time, you may flip one or both over. So when you add cards to these piles, you can actually keep 1 or 2 face down. These always refresh at the start of each round, so you always want to use them. This is a way to try to play mind games with your opponents because maybe you did put that calamity face down, or maybe it was something else and you just want them to think it's a calamity so they don't select it when really it's a card you really desired. Once you finish the choose phase, which is when all the drafting occurs, you're then going to go into the planning phase. During this phase, this is when you take all the cards you selected and decide what you're going to do with them. If you picked up any face down ones, now's the time to flip them over. If it's a calamity, it automatically gets built into your duchy where you are going to lose those points at the end of the game. Now, you have 2 options with these cards. You can either A, put them in your construction area, which means you're planning on building these buildings and hopefully adding them to your duchy for points or abilities later. You may also decide to cycle them for their recycle value here, meaning if I decide to get rid of this card, I may get a free material of that color instead. Those resources have to go directly onto a card already in construction, where every 5 resources you put there get converted into one of these crystalliums. They're pretty much wilds, and unlike other resources, can be banked outside of cards. So in this case, I can imagine that let's say these 2 cards are great early starts, getting a lot of resources for cheap, and these 2 cards actually require that red resource, the wild, to build, so they're probably too hard, so I'll give those away for 2 resources, and let's say I give this card away as well, because if I do that, this card is built at any time that you cover the resources here in the cost. You will return the resources to the board, and then you will build the card into your duchy. Now, if there is a bonus here, usually soldiers or that red resource, you will gain those into your supply. Once both sides have finished either completing buildings or putting things into their construction area, it's time for the resource step. This is where you get more cubes starting from the top, going down, and based on the cards in your duchy. There's also going to be a bonus depending on how much you make. So let's start off at the beginning. Let's say this person makes 4 material. Let's say your opponent does as well. Nothing happens. You gain those resources and you can put them either on cards already built or once again down there. Now the next step is population, and we make 3. Let's say our opponent only makes 1. Because we make more than them, we have supremacy. That means you take a soldier token and put it on the empty space down here in your color. If there's already a soldier token there, then you're going to add it to your board. You will continue this step for gold and exploration and adding them to either cards on the board here or down there where they can be recycled into these beautiful little gems. You will continue this until you've completed 4 rounds going back and forth to who starts the draft, and then you're going to calculate points. Fast forward a little bit, and let's say you ended the game with these cards constructed. Anything not built yet will not help you. So you can just put these back, and now let's focus on your final score. First, you're going to look at cards that give a flat bonus. For example, like this gives 6 points, that gives 4, so that would be 10 points there for you. Then, cards that give bonuses for the purple type. There are 3 types. There's this blue treasure, this yellow castle, and the purple helmet. You will look here for any of them that want a purple bonus. So right now there's only 1 card here that gives you 4 points for every purple. There's only 1 here, so that is only 4 points. Then do the same with yellows, then blues. Remember that your personal card, depending on which side you're playing, may give a bonus to one of these as well. Then you'll lose points depending on cards in hand that have negatives. So in this case, that would be -8. And then, of course, anything else, and you see who has the highest score. Now, that is the core mechanics of the game, but actually, while you're playing, before you begin, you're going to choose one of 3 modules to use, and I'm going to go over those now. The first one is the advisors. The advisors are these green cards. Whenever you draft one, you just put them aside. They're already built for you, and they give a soldier bonus. Once each round, you may spend the soldiers to trigger their abilities. Almost all of them are beneficial, and that is it. Now, before I get to the other 2 modules, if you're not playing with advisors, you will shuffle in these treasures. They're basically designed just to be recycled for more resources. Next up are the monsters. Now, instead of using calamities when each person draws a calamity into their hand at the beginning of the draft and tries to get their opponent to take them, instead, each person's going to have their own unique monster group that they'll pull from. They each have 4 copies, 1 for each round. Now, each player will choose one, like so, and each one not only gives negative points like the calamities, but also have their own unique power that you'll need to keep track of and could change your strategy on how to choose to take these things or maybe avoid them because they're even worse than what you expected. Unlike the calamities, which you're usually just stuck with, they have a soldier cost up here. You may spend these soldiers to discard them and get rid of them out of your capital. It is highly advised you do that because usually, especially like the Frost Giant here, they're going to give you a bad time. The final module is the quests. You're going to choose one of these 3 cards, and you're going to have options for you to complete, in essence, a quest you're going on. Now, they all have different requirements, and you don't need to go in order. You can choose any one you want. The only requirement is that if you don't finish the last one here, you're not eligible to win. And of course, if neither player finishes it, that means no one wins. You'll use these tokens in your color to mark them so multiple people can complete the same one. Some of them do have bonuses for being the first to complete it, and all of the last ones will require a large amount of soldiers in order for you to complete the final step of the quest. As I stated, there's a solo mode as well, but it will mostly follow similar lines to this with some few tweaks. And you're going to compare your score at the end to a sort of gold, silver, bronze scoring tier. There's also some scenarios exclusively for the solo mode that add some extra little twists and rules besides just playing the basic 3 modules that I mentioned before. Now, in terms of the drafting experience, this is actually an interesting trend I've been seeing. I feel like I've seen a lot of these trying to make Drafter fit for smaller groups, and in particular like this or Seven Wonders Duel, the specifically 2-player experience. Because drafting usually is a large group thing, hence Seven Wonders, or if you're like me coming from Magic the Gathering, you think of a large group where you're passing around cards, where not only you're picking what's good for you, but really how your opponents are picking cards, so that way you can maybe try to take cards that they desperately need. Now, in the 2-player experience, there's only one other player you have to worry about. And the way that this game tackles it was less about trying to outmaneuver your opponent's picks, but rather trying to, I feel like, a bit more of a bartering system where you're trying to make sure the cards you want are on the side that's less appealing to your opponent. So when I think of something, for example, like Seven Wonders Duel, when I draft in there are obviously going to be times you should always pick what's good for you, but maybe I might not pick a card to reveal a card to my opponent, giving him more options. When in this, I'm thinking, okay, what cards in my hand do I really want to keep? Okay, maybe I should make sure that that is not in a pile that is, if he tries to take it from me, rewarding to him. So even if I don't get the good card, maybe I'm forcing him to make a very good pick for me where I get more cards. Then, of course, the trap cards is how you can play mind games with them and be like, oh, did I put the calamity out there? Am I going to wait to the end? And because you have 2 trap cards each round, I like that they didn't limit you, like you only refresh 1, allowing you to just go all in on that, because I really think that helps a lot with the mental chess game that you're playing against each other. And you don't have to use both at once. I find it actually more effective to just make 1 card face down. They're just not sure what you put there. Now, in terms of the modules, this is where I think there's going to be a bit more of a shift in terms of what you enjoy. Because I found it actually a little bit weird that there wasn't just here's the vanilla mode, and then you can add these modules. They strictly say in the rulebook, you got to add a module. I think this probably could be fine. It might be a little on the boring side in terms of not including any of the modules, but that's what sort of a vanilla rule set is for. But that's my own experience. So let me go through each module. The first one being the advisors. This is the one I would highly suggest you start off with, because this is the least aggressive one and the hardest one for you to feel bad about, and which I'll get to in the other modules. You may want a certain power here, but they all cost soldiers, so depending on whether you get the cards to make soldiers, maybe you'll be able to trigger some of those abilities. If you don't get soldiers to trigger them, well, I mean, it's putting you a little behind, but it's not a negative reaction. You just don't get a bonus. And they give soldiers just from getting them too. So, and they don't require resources. So it's really easy for someone who's newer to the game to maybe play around, make some mistakes, and get some little bonuses along the way. Now, for the next module, the monster one, this one is, at least for me, the most interesting of the bunch. You're each choosing a different monster, so depending on which combinations of monsters you choose can change how the game is played. The base comes with 4, but I can imagine, in fact, I would hope that they make more monsters for this. Now, they have different difficulties, and they explain in the rulebook what they do. Personally, though, they suggest at the beginning to use the Frost Giant and the Giant Rat. I disagree with that. I do not think the Frost Giant is a beginner one. In fact, I would consider him one of the meanest, tying with or at the least the same tier level to me as the Shadow Monster, which forces you to discard a resource. The Frost Giant pretty much freezes something, forces you not only to kill it, to be able to build it, but you have to have the resource on there to build it first. And it just sort of felt like it put you back a few many turns compared to your opponents, especially if you accidentally drafted more of them than them. So that's definitely not one I would start with. I highly suggest the Giant Rat and the Thief. Overall, because the asymmetrical style of each person having their own calamity monster, it's gonna be a little bit weird and could depend on the experience of the people at the table. But I think that's where you're gonna get the most interesting weird plays and picks and decisions when it comes to at least when the bad cards in there. The final one is the quests. And this was probably my least favorite of them all. Having something that is a mandatory or no one can win means you have to rush that. I had a game where I got slaughtered in points. It was like 30-90 rounding a little bit, triple. They beat me way ahead, but they didn't get enough soldiers to complete that final quest. And it sort of feels bad when you feel like you've done this great combo, but your opponent didn't do anything, but they're able to just get the soldier cards and build that and get rid of that. I wish there was a way that maybe instead of a straight up loss, it would be maybe a big point hit. So like the monsters, which you can take them, they're going to hurt, but maybe even the Frost Giant, you can push through it. You literally cannot push through these. And notice, by the way, all these require soldiers. They require at least 10 soldiers. One of them is 15. I did not expect the soldiers to play such a huge role in this game, which is a little weird to me because in my head, when I'm looking at this board, I'm like, all right, I can't wait. I'm putting cubes down. I'm building things. I'm building my engine. This is really fun. And I'm like, oh, I got some soldiers. They're a bonus. They're not a bonus. You're almost what your core thought process should be for most of these modes. And the problem with the quest one being it's desperately mandatory. And since this deck is completely random, depending on what cards come out in the hand, you might not get a lot of the good soldier cards, or worse, you might get soldier cards, but not the other cards that you need to actually get the resources to build the soldier cards in time. I have yet to play a game of the quest mode where both players finish the final quest. I have had it when neither player has. So because of that, it's the one that I felt was the least rewarding and felt the most stressful of just desperately trying to pass a test rather than seeing how well you can actually draft in the engine you build compared to your opponent. Overall, I do think there's some great design decisions here. Instead of just making it simply about picking the card you want or avoiding picking something that gives it to your opponent, you have to think what your opponent wants and how to make things certain more appealing, or to play mind games with them with the traps in order to make sure you get the cards you want. The engine building itself is simple, but it's satisfying. I love building up cards and seeing how I get more and more resources each round. And of course, at the end of the game, feeling pretty good that, oh, now I got ×4 plus another ×4 for this color because I actually built all the yellows that I need. And then as for the modules, the advisor one, perfect. I think that one is a really great one to introduce people to, and it doesn't feel punishing. If you don't get enough soldiers, you get just a bonus with your advisors, and they don't cost anything either. So you get something for free in essence for someone to play with. The monster one is the one where I think is probably is the most interesting of them all. It can have some ups and downs depending on the monsters you choose, but I think the asymmetrical nature of it, the way the monsters could, depending on when they're drafted, not simply just negative points, they could hurt more or less depending on what cards you already have, adds a bit more interesting strategy picks in terms of what's hidden, what's open, and hopefully what's to come in future expansions. Unfortunately for me, the quest one module was a bit of a dud. It felt less like I'm drafting and trying to make a combo, and rather who can actually just get the soldiers they need to complete that quest first. It is possible that both people complete the quest, and then you actually have to go to points, and then whoever drafted the most and got the best points wins. That just never happened to me. It was simply just, did you check the box off? And because of that, it's not the mode I'm going to go back to when I go back to this game. Crits and misses for It's a Wonderful Kingdom. Crits. The two-player drafting system in this game wants you to focus on how to make different piles more attractive or less attractive to your opponent in order to make sure you get the picks you desire. This is less about just simply denying certain resources to your opponent, but rather thinking what they need versus what you need and the cost benefit in order to make sure you get the best cards that will increase your engine without maybe giving too much to your opponent. And of course, throwing in not only the negative value cards of calamities or monsters, as well as trap cards allows a bit more mind games to be in there that will keep you engaged throughout each round. This game has a great two-player experience, but the solo mode is worth pointing out as its own crit as well. I think it does all of the modes just as well, if not sometimes better. The scenarios also add unique, interesting rules outside of just the regular modules. This allows you to not only try the modules with the same rules, but maybe some weird twists on them, meaning you're more likely to come back to the game in order to try to get that gold ranking. Misses. The deck is not random and not tiered in any way to make sure that certain cards do or do not appear. I know this is pretty par for the course for drafting. It just stinks in some of the modules if you can't get the resources or cards in the first few rounds in order to usually get the soldiers you need to complete the objectives of either the quest or dealing with some of those monsters. The different modules definitely shape the way the game plays and what strategies are more useful or not. And unfortunately for me, the quest module was a bit of a dud. I found that instead of adding more options to the game, it made it basically a race for soldiers of who can complete the final quest first. Not because only one person can finish the final quest, but rather, so far for me at least, only one person has been able to make enough resources to make it to the end. So those of you who are Magic the Gathering fans may have saw this like I did and think, oh, this is Fact or Fiction, the game. And you're right there. It is pitting you against your opponent, trying to make two different offerings and trying to trick them to pick the one that you are fine with them picking while keeping the one you really want, off to the side, maybe looking less appealing. Or if you're clever enough, make it a lose-lose situation for them when both of them are very good picks for you. And because you can also put cards face down, there's going to be so many fun little mind games in there. Whether you make certain side more balanced or not, or you make it equal and you put down that face down card like, all right, I put this card over here, but there's 3 cards over here, but one of them's face down. You don't know what it is. Could be Calamity. could be a boat. And because of that, there's a lot of fun back and forth table talk that's going to go on versus I feel drafts tend to be a bit more quiet, at least the ones that I tend to play. Now, the modules are really going to change up the rules and strategies, but for the most part, if you're playing the advisor one, that's going to be much more of a simpler time, where I feel the monster one can be a bit more aggressive in a good way. There's going to be a bit more back and forth and strategies depending on which monsters are picked. Because of that, that's where I'm most excited for in their expansions of this game, because different monsters with weirder powers could really change things. Like outside of, oh, it's a negative card, it'd be like, I think I can take a giant rat this turn. I don't have any giant rats yet. I'll take this card. But if you already have like 2 giant rats, I can't take a giant rat. It's going to really give me a lot of points. I got to get soldiers kind of thing. It adds a lot more to it. Unfortunately to me, the quest card did the exact opposite. For the quest, it was just get soldiers, get soldiers, get soldiers. And while it is possible for both players to reach that final quest objective, therefore having to see who can draft better, that didn't happen to me. Every time was either everyone lost or one player was able to complete that objective. So that one, I'm just not going to go back to, even for the solo mode. Speaking of which, I do want to state how these solo scenarios are where this game shines solo mode. The solo other ones are fine. They're fun to play with. But the scenarios add extra rules. They even tell you to take out certain cards, and they're already maybe in a construction area or built, be it advisor or regular cards. And because of that, it actually seems to combat the randomness I mentioned before, where things are not tiered, where it's sort of just an entire deck. You just have to hope what comes out. And that way you're more solving a puzzle, which is what I tend to enjoy. And that means even if, let's say, I've played the monster mode many times on the 2-player version, if I go and play the scenario involving monsters and add some extra different weird rules, it's going to feel different, and how I play it is going to be a lot more interesting. And of course, with the scoring system of the bronze, silver, and gold, I can say at least I did not earn a gold reward yet, and that kept me wanting to go back and maybe like, oh, maybe this time I can go and just get those points differently, and I'll know how to go and deal with this scenario now that I've played it. So I do think that this does a very good job of a solo experience that does not feel tacked on, rather almost more core to this than the 2-player. You can let me know what your thoughts on this are if you've had the chance to purchase this or even try it out as Gen Con's coming up. You can let me know if you agree with me, or did you find the quest mode to be your favorite module of them all? I'd love to hear from you in the comments down below. But for now, thank you so much for watching up to this point. I would really appreciate it if you liked and subscribed. And of course, if you think someone would be interested in this game, send that to them. But for now, I'm Will Keeler, and this has been Roll for Crit.